Good evening, welcome to the Andrew Bolt program. I'm Steve Price, filling in again for Andrew. Now, Andrew will be back with you next week after his outstanding on-the-ground reporting from Israel. What a pleasure it's been to have him there. Andrew will be with us this half hour after some high-level talks today, security talks that Andrew's been involved with, including Australia's ambassador to Israel. Now, coming up tonight on the program, a massive day of political intrigue and drama. Now, we've got spy catchers and the Aussie politician who is said to have sold out his own country, a traitor. We'll talk to Michael Shoebridge about this shortly. It was revealed by the boss of ASIO last night, and today serving and ex-politicians demanded that that politician be identified. We'll also look at the warning of fears from ASIO of a lone wolf attack, a terror attack in this country. We also try and get to the bottom of the debate surrounding new fuel regulations out of Canberra and their impact on the big-selling utes like Ford Ranger, the Toyota Hilux, you know the ones I'm talking about. Chris Bowen says the opposition are making things up. The industry isn't convinced. Paul Marrick, who's one of the co-founders of Car Expert, has been investigating. He'll give us the bottom line on that. And the world is full of speculation surrounding the mystery illness that has struck down Princess Kate, the wife of Prince William. She's vanished off the face of the earth, and there's a whole bunch of strange conspiracy theories out there. But what exactly is wrong with Princess Kate? We'll get the latest from Patrick Christie's. He's from GB News. But first, and as I said, Andrew Bolt is coming up shortly from Israel. But back home, I've got a question. How is it that Victorian taxpayers are funding, and have been funding for years, an outfit called the Islamic Council of Victoria, headed by its president, Adel Salman, who on radio yesterday, and we played this for you yesterday, called the October 7 terrorist attack, a quote, a legitimate act of resistance and, quote, by the Palestinian people. Here, have a look at this grab.
It is absolutely legitimate for the Palestinians to try to break the siege of Gaza.
No, I'm talking about October the 7th.
As I said, I'm not going to condemn the Palestinians for resisting. I'm not going to condemn the Palestinians for trying to break their siege on their territory.
Sorry, I just want to be clear. October the 7th, You're saying you won't denounce that?
I denounce any violence against civilians.
To her credit, Patricia Cavalis, the ABC presenter there, did pull him up. But just to remind everyone, and for context about that attack on the 7th, it started with a barrage of Palestinian rockets, about 3,000 of them, fired into Israel. And then Hamas terrorists used powered paragliders to enter Israel and start their slaughter. They attacked border kibbutz communities. They attacked a dance festival, plus military bases. Now, Andrew was at those places this week, and he's described horrific images that he has seen on security footage of rape victims, bullet-riddled civilians attacked in their homes and cars. It was awful. It was the worst terror attack since September 11. To call, as Salman did yesterday, this legitimate and call it resistance is abhorrent. Not surprisingly, this has led to calls from the Jewish community around the country, and Jewish leaders in particular in Melbourne, for taxpayer funding of this outfit to be frozen or cut permanently. Now, the Victorian Premier, Jacinta Allan, was out talking about bushfires today, but as far as I'm aware, she has yet to comment on those calls. Now, for me, I wonder just why taxpayers are funding the Islamic Council of Victoria anyway. So how much are we actually putting in this outfit's pockets? And given Salman's view of the world, what is it that that money is being used for? What's it being spent on? Well, the Herald Sun reports today that a 2018 state government investigation found that the council itself had received, wait for it, $2.4 million in government funding between 2010 and 2018. $2.4 million to the Islamic Council. Now, recently it was revealed the latest grants to Islamic groups in Victoria was $3 million in a year between 4 Islamic groups. That's in 1 year, not 8 years. And what was the reason that we handed over this money? What did we hand it out for? Well, we handed it out for, quote, critical outreach work, whatever that might mean. Now, back in 2018, the Herald Sun got close to what some of the money was actually being spent on. It was being used for taxpayer-funded safe spaces where Muslim youth could go and vent extreme speech. I kid you not. A space where they could go and shout about extreme speech. Now, seriously, we're paying Muslim teenagers to have somewhere to vent extremism? OK, so back then, in the spirit of healing relationships with the Islamic communities in Victoria, you could maybe at a stretch justify the money, but using it that way? Really? Now things have changed. The terrorists, Hamas, saw to that. To have the leader of one of these outfits trying to justify the slaughter of innocent civilians on October 7 as legitimate put pay to any further contributions to this outfit. Premier Allen must come out and make it crystal clear to Mr Salman that until he apologises to the local Jewish community and denounces the October 7 attacks, not 1 cent will be transferred to his organisation. But don't hold your breath. This is Victoria after all. The Vice President of the Islamic Council of Victoria is a bloke called Mohammed Mohideen. He's employed by the Victorian Government as a multicultural commissioner. The Herald Sun today reports that he was last year investigated over a series of social media posts accusing Israel of genocide, ethnic cleansing and mass murder. The commission allowed Mr Mohideen, can you believe it, to retain his job. The ball is now firmly in Premier Allen's court, and it's a big test for the socialist left-leaning newbie Premier as we approach the 2024 Ramadan that begins on Sunday week, an annual observance, of course, in the Islamic community that is celebrated with an iftar dinner, a dinner hosted by the Premier that has now been cancelled because a large number of the guests refused to attend. Andrew's back with us up shortly. ASIO boss Mike Burgess, as I mentioned to you, delivered his annual threat assessment to Australia last night. He has set off a political storm that's still gathering pace as we go to air tonight. Reporting of the speech this morning concentrated on his assessment of terrorist threats, as it should, and the possibility of a terror attack. But it was also the revelation that a former politician sold out their country, party and former colleagues to a spy network that ASIO has dubbed the A-Team. Now, Burgess didn't name the accused spy, causing former politicians like Joe Hockey to demand the traitor be outed, named and shamed. Joe Hockey went further and wants retrospective justice dealt out.
If someone has been a traitor, I can't think of a more significant issue when it comes to national security. And of course, he should say immediately who it is, not simply come out of the shadows, say there was a politician and then go back to the shadows and leave everyone else wondering who the hell it was.
He's probably right, but as my colleague Peter Credlin said, it's probably more important what ASIO was saying about the possibility of a sleeper cell in Australia carrying out a terror attack. Joining me now is someone who was in the audience at that address last night by the ASIO boss, Michael Shoebridge from Strategic Analysis Australia. Michael, always good to catch up. You were there at that speech last night. Do you agree with Peter that the threat of a terror attack is what we should be concentrating on?
Well, I think Peter is right, but we've got to be able to walk and chew gum. So I would love to see this traitor to our country prosecuted. That can happen, that should happen, but I think we're right not to overlook the other point that Mike Burgess made, that Sunni terrorism is the most threatening source of an attack here in Australia. And I think he's right about that.
When I heard him make that warning, Michael, it struck me, and it wouldn't have struck you the same way because you're immersed in this stuff all the time. It struck me that average Australians haven't talked about, worried about and feared a terrorist attack now for a very long time.
Yes, and in fact, ASIO lowered the terrorist threat level just a little while ago. Well, I think it's time to put it back up again based on what Mike Burgess told us. Before he spoke, he showed a short film about the Ukraine war, about the war in the Middle East, but also about some very violent, angry protests in Australia and other parts of the world. And that anger we see in our community is a source of opportunity for Sunni terrorist groups. Don't forget Hamas is a Sunni terrorist group, and so is Islamic State. They're not dead yet. They killed a whole bunch of people in Iran. When you see that anger on Australian streets, that is the land of opportunity for these terrorists.
So when the ASIO boss talks about the A-team spy revelations revealing that a former politician had been compromised, he hasn't named the politician, and he in fact hasn't named the source of the A-team, where they came from. What's your suspicion of where they might have originated from?
Well, when you look at the numbers and scale of foreign intelligence agencies that have an intent to target Australia, the two big ones are Russia and China, but China is far bigger and more dangerous as an intelligence community than Russia, and China has form. The reason we had to strengthen our laws back in 2018 was because of China's intelligence intrusions into Australia to corrupt our political system. So my bet is on China, and that's just driven by the numbers and track record.
Well, that's absolutely right. And you and I have spoken before, and you've told me before about the amount of activity by Chinese residents in Australia working back to the Communist Party in China and the things that they are potentially getting up to. I mean, they are very active, aren't they?
Yes, but what we were told last night is ASIO has done fantastic work to identify that spy ring and identify the fact that they had successfully cultivated an Australian politician who was then doing their bidding in return for money and benefits and betraying their country. There's a whole body of evidence there that should be the start of a criminal prosecution. Now, it's not Mike Burgess's job to do prosecutions or decide whether there should be one. The Attorney General needs to drive a formal criminal prosecution of this former politician.
That would be a retrospective investigation. I don't quite understand why, if they identified this A group, as they called them, and then they identified the contact with the politician, would ASIO not have gone to the AFP or the AG or someone in government and said, listen, this is what this bloke's been up to. I think you better investigate him and charge him? I don't understand that.
Well, they went... They told the spy ring that was doing it that they'd been discovered and found out. So they told the foreign spy agency. They also went to the politician and said, this is a bad thing, you need to stop. And apparently the person did. But how is it possibly left there? ASIO has gathered this phenomenal body of information that lets Mike Burgess tell us what he told us last night. Espionage has been a crime in Australia since 1914. And this is inside the statute of limitations. There should be a criminal prosecution.
Yeah, it's beggars belief, really. I mean, you know, I go and work as a traitor. I take some sort of payment, presumably, or, you know, are given assets in a company or whatever. I betray my country. I betray my colleagues in politics. I betray everybody I've ever dealt with. And I say, OK, you caught me, but I'm going to stop now.
So we leave this politician who, to use Mike Burgess's words, has sold out his country to enjoy the fruits of selling out the country and to just sit there fat, dumb and happy and live their life. Meanwhile, every politician is now a suspect and they're all busily trying to say it wasn't me. If we want to corrode trust in our politicians, not prosecuting this person is the best way to do that. We need to build trust in our political system, not degrade it.
Yeah, magnificently said, Michael Shoebridge. It was a pleasure to catch up with you. Thank you very much. That's Michael Shoebridge there.
Thanks.
OK, let's check back in with Andrew Bolt now. Andrew, as we've been telling you this week, is in Israel. He's bringing us some outstanding insights into the war in the Middle East. He'll be back on the desk on Monday night. Last night, I couldn't believe those pictures. He was at the Western Wall. You saw the incredible images of one of the holiest places on earth, and he joins me again from Israel. Andrew, I started the show, your show tonight, calling on the Allen government to cancel funding for the Islamic Council of Victoria after those comments yesterday from Adel Salman, who talked about October 7 being, you know, a war of the choosing of the Palestinians, and they had to break the back of the Israelis. What chance do you think of that happening?
Not as much chance as Walid Ali criticising them. Walid Ali used to be the Islamic Council's spokesman and sitting on their executive council. So I don't think so. Look, I looked at the funding before the last state election. Both sides of politics wanted to fund the Islamic Council. They need the votes. But guess what? I couldn't believe some of the funding that this Labor government has promised. I kid you not. It went into the election promising this. A Labor government will invest $500,000 to fund an exhibition to celebrate the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Peace be upon him, it says, and share the history of our Islamic communities. He went on to say he wanted to also partner with the same Islamic Council to deliver an important exhibition to enable Muslim Victorians to celebrate the Prophet's life and give more Victorians the opportunity to take part as well. Can you tell me, Steve, why exactly is this government funding the proselytizing of one particular faith, the Muslim faith? And this is the same government, you might recall, whose police, whose judiciary, whose courts put in jail the most senior Catholic in Australia, the third most senior in the world, Cardinal Pell, on completely bogus charges of child sexual abuse.
Yeah, I can't explain it. They've been funding this council for years now, and 3 other Islamic groups in Melbourne. And I note Salman overnight, and I suspect I know what he's up to here. This is very tricky. He called on the Premier to cancel her iftar dinner because of the government's refusal to denounce what Israel's doing. I suspect he wanted that dinner cancelled for other reasons, and they came to light today because so many people are deciding they don't want to attend.
I mean, what is the point? So you do this outreach to the Muslim community and you get slapped in the face for it. I mean, it's how many dinners does the Victorian Premier hold for Catholic leaders every year, right? It's just look, the whole thing is just bogus. He put out a statement, I saw the head of the Islamic Council saying, well, you know, I do now condemn the innocent victims of October 7, the massacre by Hamas of 1,200 people, the kidnapping, etc., etc. I'd like him to define what innocent actually means. Now, you know, Steve, I've got to apologise to you. I wanted to give you another sexy backdrop instead of repeating the one back here of Tel Aviv. But it turns out, I've got these meetings, I've got the Australian ambassador in a few minutes, I've got the Israeli president just after that, so I couldn't go scouting. But it turns out this is perfect. Tel Aviv is rich because of things like innovation, startup, tech, all that kind of stuff, right? Gaza down the road, 45 minutes, run by the Islamist Hamas movement, the terrorist movement. They could have been exactly like this. They could be like this today. Palestinians aren't stupid. Right near, not far from where you live, on the Mornington Peninsula, is one of the best wineries in Australia, run by Palestinians. They're smart people. Instead, all these billions of dollars of aid, some of it our money, they conducted Hamas. They built 700 kilometres of tunnels. They bought all these weapons, all these rockets, all these missiles with the money, and then started a war that's devastated their territory, Gaza. I mean, it's just insane. If only they'd shown the entrepreneurship and a will for peace, none of this would have happened.
You've had some intelligence briefings in the last 24 hours. I understand you found out that, in fact, the Hamas attacks were so badly timed that they've upset their paymasters, the Iranians, who didn't want it to happen that early, and they're not very happy with the Hamas leadership.
I've had some terrific briefings. I know it's a holiday, strange way to have a holiday. Former head of Shin Bet, a former official of Mossad, the external spy agency, Shin Bet being the internal one, politicians on both sides of parliament, the country's top counter-terrorism expert, others and others and others. But the point here is the picture that emerges, I can't quote people directly, it was off the record, but the picture that emerges is that Iran is the big enemy, of course. Iran is Shiite. Most of its enemies are Sunni, like particularly Saudi Arabia. They have funded around Israel a circle of Islamist terror groups to attack Israel. 45 minutes that way is Hezbollah, which is the biggest terrorist army around. Hamas in Gaza, 45 minutes that way, is small in comparison, would you believe? So Hezbollah, 2 hours that way, half an hour that way, more Hamas, more Islamic State, that's the West Bank, half an hour away, Islamic Jihad, other terrorist groups also funded by Iran. And if Israel wants to, this is the Mediterranean Sea, if they want to take out cargo to, say, China or Australia or Japan, normally you would go through the Suez Canal over there and down into the Red Sea. Hamas has also funded Houthi rebels who now shoot at any ship that has any connection with Israel with their missiles. So they've got a ring of terror around it. The idea for Iran was to buy time while they built a nuclear weapon. They're very close to that. That's what the world's been trying to stop. It's close to it. But Hamas went off half-cocked. Israel was supposed to be attacked from all sides. But Hamas went first, and the supreme leader of Iran, I think it was December, called in the senior Hamas official to come and see him, and apparently, according to reports, yelled at him for an hour about how it spoiled the whole thing by going too soon. Israel got lucky.
Your audience is going to love having you back on Monday. You travel safely between Israel and back here, and we'll see you on air on Monday. Thanks for your great insights this week.
Steve, I don't know. I keep getting messages saying Steve Price is great. Don't come back. No, not quite. But I mean, you're doing a great job. So thank you very much.
Yeah, very kind of Andrew. Now, coming up after the break, now Labor, federal Labor, is still out there spruiking its electric vehicle policy, but just how is it actually going to affect you? That's up next. I'm going to talk to Paul Marrick. Now, Paul's done a lot of work on these electric vehicles. Don't believe what Chris Bowen's telling you. The price of your ute will go up if Labor gets away with introducing these new fuel laws. That's next. Welcome back. Now, look, I've already spoken a number of times about Labor's new vehicle emissions targets and how they're going to end up being the toughest in the world. Now, the targets, starting next year, by the way, January 1, aim to reduce car emissions by 60% in 5 years. Now, stick with me here because there's a whole lot of complicated stuff being put out there by our mate Chris Bowen. Now, it's set to add, depending on who you listen to, thousands to the price of new cars, and the hardest hit will be utes. You got the Ford Ranger, the Toyota Hilux, and the Isuzu D-Max. They're our top 3 selling cars, utes, and they will struggle to meet the new targets without a radical change. Now, I want to get to the bottom of this. Joining me now is car expert co-founder Paul Marrick, who I've spoken to a lot about this. Paul, let's just cut to the chase. We have a messy, complicated debate going on here. On the one hand, we've got fuel quality, then you've got emission regulation on new vehicles, and you've got EVs. Let's start with what happens on January 1. What happens?
January 1, things get pretty complicated. Car manufacturers are up for massive fines that they can either pay to the government or pay as credits to companies like Tesla who don't have any emitting vehicles. But it's going to mean that you as a consumer are going to be paying more for cars because at the end of the day, a car company needs to make money and they're not going to be...
Well, let's follow the money. So I'm a Toyota dealer and I'm selling Toyota Hiluxes. Come January 1, I'm selling the same Toyota Hilux as I'm selling today, am I not?
Yeah, absolutely. They don't have a product ready to go yet.
Some public servant is going to be tracking how many Hiluxes I sell and send me a bill because they don't meet the new regulations. Is that how that works?
Absolutely, because the cars are above this level they're trying to implement. They're trying to model it off the States as well. And the funniest part about that is in the States, they're looking to wind it back. And in addition to that, the bigger the vehicle is, the less it's impacted because they know that people are buying big pickup trucks.
Well, you and I know that the dealer margins are slim. They don't make a lot of money out of selling one car or 2 cars or 3 cars. So they're going to pass it on to the consumer.
Yeah.
So your Toyota, what would an average Toyota Hilux cost you?
Look, I mean, the most common one's probably going to be an SR5, about 60 grand, 65 grand,
So the penalty's going to be around about $5,000 or $6,000 on that car?
Yep.
So that'll go straight onto the bottom line of the price.
Yep.
So how's Chris Bowen stand up in Parliament and start reading out that car prices never went up in the United States when the fuel quality was changed. That's the example he used.
Yeah, look, it's totally idiotic. So in the States, I mentioned that the bigger the vehicle is, the less it's affected by this. Best-selling vehicle in the States is the Ford F-150. So the price of that didn't go up because it wasn't affected by this. So I just think that they haven't looked far enough into this. They don't know what Australians are buying. And the biggest insult is that if you're an Australian that wants to do something better or greener, there is no alternative for a ute. There is no alternative for a Land Cruiser. If you're driving around Australia, you're not going to be doing it in an electric SUV.
No, we're not. So we'll get onto that argument about EVs and utes and what they can do and what they can't do as electric cars in a moment. So Chris Bowen is trying to convince us all that this will have no impact whatsoever. But that's simply not true.
No, exactly. And look, I actually think it will have a negative impact on car companies and dealers as well, because if you're in the market for a new Hilux, for example, why would you spend an extra 5 or 10 grand on one when the one that you've got now was 5 or 10 grand less on the 31st of December? So I think we'll have less people buying new cars. Those that are forced into buying them, like tradies, will then pass on that cost to a consumer. So you've got record cost of living here, and a tradie who's going to have to fork out an extra 10 grand for their ute and has to come and do your electrical work, he's going to pass that cost on to you.
So when Labor says this is just the coalition trying to make the argument like Scott Morrison did that EVs will wreck your weekend and that utes are not going to be able to, electric utes that don't exist, I mean, this is a real political question. I mean, the coalition should seize upon this, or Anthony Albonety's got to say to Bowen, mate, these cars are going to cost more. You've got to drop off this stuff.
Absolutely. And the car manufacturers do not have alternatives. You cannot materialise an alternative by the 1st of Jan. So there will be at least a 1 or 2 year period before we even see vehicles in that segment that are even close to being able to meet these emissions regulations. So they've just not met with anyone in the industry to actually figure out how this is all going to work.
So Bowen stands up in Parliament with a bit of paper, and so he gets a question from an opposition MP who lives in a particular seat. And he quotes how many average kilometres the people who live in that seat do. And then he says they will save $1,200 because the petrol won't cost them as much, or they won't use as much petrol. That's a complete crap argument. That's not true.
It's insane. So they're looking into the future where they'll have these fuel-efficient vehicles. But ultimately, if you're a consumer today that can't afford to feed yourself, you're not in the market for a new car. So how on earth are you ever going to be in the market for a more expensive electric vehicle that's meant to save you money? I mean, the argument just does not stack up at all.
So you have a great, with Car Expert, you have a great global view of motoring. Yep. Tell me, around the world, what electric vehicle, what EV utes are there currently?
Not many. And
so we saw in Parliament the other day, someone was quoting this LDV thing out of China and the range it could do.
Yep.
And then when you put a load in it, which is what you buy for,
that's it.
The range comes back. Is that true?
Absolutely. I mean, the range was about 300 Ks, and that's before you even
this thing
put
cost $90,000.
90 grand. So it's an extra 20 grand
it's
above.
It's a cheap Chinese ute for 90 grand. Who would want it?
I don't know. And then you look at stuff like the F-150 Lightning, which is the best-selling full electric ute in the States. Same story. If you try and tow with it, your range is reduced by about 2/3. So, OK, great, you can have an electric ute, but you just can't do anything with it. What is the point in that?
So these are mostly Chinese produced?
Yeah, look, at the moment...
The Chinese are getting better at making cars.
Absolutely,
they're not as good as the Koreans or the Japanese.
And it's not even about where it's made. It is the physics of a ute. It needs a big battery. The bigger the battery, the more energy you need to move the vehicle. Second, you put a load on it or try and tow with it. If you want to drive around Australia at the moment, there is not an electric vehicle out there that will be suitable for that job. And you would not be seen dead in the middle of nowhere with an electric vehicle hoping that you're going to make it to the next PowerPoint.
Well, you guys did a really interesting experiment. We talked about this on air before, about two cars, identical BMWs that went up to Sydney. It was more expensive for the EV. The federal government, in its wisdom, has gone out and replaced its Commonwealth car fleet with a whole bunch of expensive BMW electric vehicles. One worth 130 and one worth 150. That's outrageous. I mean, why wouldn't they go and buy an MG electric vehicle and drive around in them?
That's a good question. I was literally at BMW returning a car the other day, and they were taking delivery of them, and there was 25 of them parked out the front. It is insane. And that is a car with a sticker price, like you said, 130, 150 grand.
How many of them were there?
It was a whole row of them. So, I mean, it is baffling to me, even if you have a look at Victoria, right? Victoria, we are in so much debt here. It's one of the most poorly run states in Australia. And you have police driving around in BMW X5s, BMW 5 Series. It's a $120,000 car.
What I loved was the Commonwealth car drivers were sitting around studying maps on where to charge all the things while they brought them down here for ASIO. Good luck finding the charges. Paul, it's always great to see you, mate. Look after yourself. I'll talk to you soon. Commonwealth drivers, as I said, have been instructed to do that. They're all going to be here on the streets of Melbourne next week. Plenty of people will see them, so have a look for them. Paul Marrick, thank you very much for your time. After the break, the countdown's on, isn't it, for the Dunkley by-election? Labor's been accused of a massive tax grab. Plus, a councillor has called for a 114-year-old Captain Cook statue to be removed. Here we go again. I'll discuss that. Much more with our panel up next. Welcome back. Steve Price in for Andrew Bolt. We'll find out shortly what's coming up on Shari tonight at the top of the hour. Now, the Dunkley by-election, great coverage is going to be right here on Sky on Saturday night with all our experts in place. 2 days away, Anthony Albanese has now been accused by the opposition of hitting Australians with 9 new taxes, including a superannuation and a food tax. Joining me now is James McPherson from the Late Debate right here on Sky at 10 p.m, of course, and Hobart City Councillor and candidate for the upcoming Tassie election, Louise Elliott. Great to see you both. Dunkley, tax grab, the tax situation in Dunkley, I think the opposition are going to make a big deal of this. Have a look. So, we haven't got that there. Labor, James, says that, look, there might be a protest vote about the federal government. I got the biggest cheer of anyone at Paul Murray's pub test the other night when I mentioned 2 words, Daniel Andrews.
Look, I think the Dunkley by-election is less a political poll and more an IQ test. Will the people of Dunkley really be crazy enough to reward Labor for all of Dan Andrews' waste and for Anthony Albanese doing something about cost of living? Anthony Albanese hasn't done anything about cost of living. I mean, a $15 a week tax cut, but Albanese gives and Albanese takes away. As the Liberals pointed out today, the government is taking far more in new taxes than they're giving in this latest tax cut. You've got an effective vehicle tax with the standards emissions that they're trying to bring in. And can you believe it? Tanya Plibersek said the other day that by mid-year we may have a tax on fashion to try to fund the fight against climate change. So if Anthony Albanese wants this to be a referendum on what he's done to address the cost of living, I say bring it on.
One thing that worries me too, James, there's been a few whispers this week about things like an increase to private health insurance costs. That's going to come out. We're going to have other issues where there's going to be price increases, but they're just keeping that all on the down low until we get past this by-election. I just worry, James, a little bit what's still to come that we don't know about.
Yeah, well, health insurance insiders have said it's the longest wait they've had to hear from the government about what should happen with premiums in 15 years. One insider described it as, quote, weird. I'm not sure it's weird. I think it's pretty obvious what the government is doing. They can't afford to have any more price rises before this by-election, so they're keeping everything under the blanket, and we'll find out after Saturday what's actually going to happen with some of these things like health insurance premiums.
Louise, I know Dunkley pretty well. I go through it on a regular basis. I've worked in that area a lot. Frankston, I've been to thousands of times. It's a classic middle-class, aspirational Australian electorate. These are people who have mortgages or they've got rents going through the roof. They're trying to put their kids through school. A lot of them are tradies. James mentioned there what's going to happen on Jan 1 when the ute prices are going to go up. I mean, Chris Bowen's just pretending about that. I mean, do you think that the people of this electorate are going to take a sledgehammer to Anthony Albanese, or will it be more of a soft drift back the other way?
Well, I know what result I'll be hoping for, but it's undoubtable that, taxing your way out of a problem in their mind is the Labor way. It's all they know how to do. Instead of looking at the root causes of problems, you just see who you can take more money off, basically. And no one's forgotten the things that we're still paying off, basically the $500 million referendum that failed, and looking at the debt that still needs to be addressed in the country and things like that. I really do hope that voters, and I do believe that voters will show that they're not idiots. They know what matters, and they know that our government needs to look at the priorities that matter and stop taking them for fools.
It's probably not such a big issue in Tasmania, but I tell you the other thing, Louise, that people were angry about the other night in the pub test down there in Dunkley was border security. I mean, not so much those recent boat arrivals, but the idea that we can bring in 500,000 immigrants into this country at a time when we've got a housing crisis, where people can't afford or can't find somewhere to rent. Now, that is an issue in Tassie. So people are angry that the government has not been sensible enough to have a sensible immigration policy during a time when we've got a housing crisis.
Absolutely, and Tasmania's treated as a regional area in terms of, visas and things like that. And it absolutely hits us, the number of immigration arrivals, because our housing, our employment opportunities, our infrastructure, especially down here in Tasmania, our health system, it has not kept up with the demand, especially in terms of being an influx through natural fertility and things like that. So no, it's a big impact across the country, including hitting Tassie.
Yeah, and everywhere James gets impacted by the number of migrants into the country, everything from schools and hospitals. I mean, they're overloaded with people. I mean, virtually no doctors anymore are doing, no bulk billing around the country. And so you've got hospital emergency departments filled up with people who have got an illness that they don't really need to be there for, but they've got nowhere else to go. That is an issue that I don't think anyone in Canberra's really got a handle on yet.
And that's the great irony of the times in which we're living, Steve. Whether you're talking about the hospital crisis, the housing crisis, the electricity crisis, these crises are being caused and exacerbated by government policies, and people have figured this out.
Louise, you've got an election coming up in Tassie. You're standing as a candidate.
Yes, that's right. I've put my hand up as an independent. Basically, I was looking at the parties and their policies and the candidates coming out, and I was feeling, to be honest, pretty underwhelmed. So I decided that I know I'm not the only one that values what I do. Things are like fairness and freedom and opportunity. So I decided to put my money where my mouth is and get my name on the ballot paper. So fingers crossed.
So the latest polls that we've got have Labor on the slide. Premier Rockcliffe could retain power. You are, as you said, an independent. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, yes, I'm an independent, but I've definitely got liberal values, especially when it comes to economic things. I'm like most Tasmanians and Australians, I would say, that I believe in effort equals reward. I believe in a strong safety net and not trashing our environment. Personally, I think we'll see another Liberal government. I'm hoping we do see a Liberal government because I think that's what's best for Tasmania, especially given Labor's policy on things. And if and when Liberal wins, this will be the third or even, I think, the fourth consecutive loss for Labor. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of soul searching to do there. So the polling day is March 23rd.
James, I don't want to send your blood pressure through the roof. You've got a program to do tonight, so I don't want to, knock you about too much. But you've got an Eastern Suburbs councillor now in Sydney calling for the 114-year-old Captain Cook statue to be removed, saying it was a reminder of colonial oppression. Do these people not ever do history at school?
Clearly not. I mean, if you'd done Year 9 or Year 10 Australian history, you'd know Captain Cook had nothing to do with colonisation. In fact, he passed away 10 years before white people set foot on Australian soil. But I mean, if you want to get rid of anything that reminds you of colonialism, well, do you want to get rid of cricket? Do you want to get rid of plumbing? Do you want to get rid of automobiles? Should we get rid of all white faces? Captain Cook was a giant of history, and he's being judged by some green mayor that no one's ever heard of. And in addition to this, part of her argument is that Captain Cook statues keep being vandalised. Therefore, we should get rid of it. That is craziness. All you're going to do is encourage more vandalism because you're teaching these vandals that they win.
Yeah, you can't reward those vandals. It's happened in Melbourne. 2 statues have been cut off at the ankles, and I can guarantee you the councils that are in charge of those statues will never put them back. Louise, we found out this afternoon in Victoria, this via the Victorian opposition, this is fantastic. Victoria's got the biggest debt in the country. It's got more debt than New South Wales, Queensland and Tasmania combined. They've built a $1.1 billion prison. It was finished last year. It's in the southwest, and it's sitting empty. The prison has been described as an eyesore. The Andrews government reacted quickly to, changes to bail laws. But guess what? We don't have enough criminals to put in there, but they've got it staffed with guards and the air conditioners turned on every day, and there's no prisoners in there.
This is unfathomable. If someone would have asked me if there was a prison sitting empty, a brand new prison sitting empty in Victoria, staffed, ready to go, I'm sure, the canteens well occupied and things like that. But this is absurd. I seriously thought that our prisons were at breaking point, and yet in Victoria somehow there's the luxury of being able to keep a brand new facility sitting empty. I mean, it's absolutely, if it wasn't such an exorbitant waste and a real shameful display of poor policy and process, it will be laughable, but it's serious.
James, we could perhaps dolly it up and solve the housing problem.
Well, exactly. I mean, we've got 2 problems here. We've got a cost of living crisis and a crime crisis, and there you've got an empty prison that's costing upwards of $30 million a year. So, satire is dead, Steve. Satire is dead.
You can't make this stuff up. James McPherson and Louise Elliott, thank you very much for your time. Have a good night, both of you. Now, after the break, where is Prince William and where is Princess Kate? Speculation's growing after the Prince of Wales pulled out of another major royal event at the last minute. It's all very odd. We'll come back and try and get to the bottom of it. Welcome back. Steve Price in for Andrew Bolt. Now, next up, I'll be speaking to GB News host Patrick Christys. There's a whole bunch of speculation growing around the royal family. We'll find out exactly what's going on. But first, here's a quick look at what's coming up on Shari.
Thanks, Steve. Coming up on the show, Malcolm Turnbull's son reveals he was approached by Chinese spies relating to a project that involved a Labor MP. And are the bosses of the top spy agencies being sidelined by the Albanese government? Those full details shortly. I'll see you at 8.
Good on you, Shari. Thank you very much for that, Shari, coming up at the top of the hour. Now, let's go to London. And speculation is rife after Prince William's pulled out of attending a major royal event at the last moment, citing a, quote, personal matter. And then, of course, you have all of the speculation about the health of Princess Kate. Joining me now from London is GB News host Patrick Christys. Now, Patrick, I must say my partner today spent about 2 hours scrolling on a deep dive on all of these theories about what might or might not be wrong with Princess Kate. I'm sure she wasn't the only person doing it. What's going on here?
Yeah, well, it certainly is very, very confusing. As I understand it, there were 2 major reasons why William pulled out at the last minute of this memorial service to his godfather, the former King Constantine of Greece. Now, the first one is that he didn't want to be pictured with Prince Andrew. He certainly didn't want to be sat next to Prince Andrew, which, as I understand it, was actually the seating plan at this memorial service. So he pulled out partly because of that, but also, yes, almost definitely because of Kate's health. Now, Kate has already not been seen for close to 3 months since her mysterious illness and procedure that took place. We are now hearing that it could be another couple of months. Speculation is mounting. Now, what is interesting is that, of course, when there's this void, then it is often filled by conspiracy theories. And there's all of this talk doing the rounds at the moment about, has she had some kind of Brazilian butt lift, which I would be absolutely amazed if that's true, although, of course, we will one day find out. However, I think the reality is that Kate obviously is very, very unwell, and William clearly needs to do a lot of the looking after for her. So deeply concerning times here, especially given the state of our king as well.
Yes, and look, Princess Kate and Prince William are down here, at least in Australia, extremely popular. I believe they're popular there as well. I mean, she was a hard-working royal. You never went a day without seeing a photograph of her out either solo or with him doing royal work. So, well, let's hope that it's not dreadfully serious, but it must be very serious if she's spending that much time apart. Speaking of the royals, Prince Harry, he's lost his... I've got to laugh at this. His security trial in the High Court. A judge determined that he wasn't unfairly stripped of that security detail after moving to the US. That's not going to make Harry happy.
No, he is, I think, the only person in British history at the moment to have lost an appeal case against the Home Office. If he wanted everything that he possibly could have desired, the best way to do it in Britain, apparently, is to enter the country illegally and we'll just give it to you all for free. But no, the judge decided that actually there were 7 things that Prince Harry was claiming about his personal safety that essentially weren't true. The British press has reacted, as you would expect, to this. The Metro today with the massive headline on the front page, Harry, you're not that special. At the Times publishing that list of 7 things that were Harry's truth but not the truth. The fact is, he's an incredibly wealthy man now, and if he wants his protection, then he can pay for it himself. He will still be offered a bespoke protection service if he came back for a specific royal event, of course. But he actually has demanded to know this morning, Harry, who the person who made this decision to strip his security was, which is ironically quite threatening.
Unbelievable. Let's turn our attention to a very serious issue, the Islamophobic row. We talked about this earlier in the week. You've got Rishi Sunak under pressure. Number of other MPs came out in support of that sacked MP Lee Anderson after he claimed Islamists had taken control of London. This is a fascinating story. What's the latest on that, Patrick?
Yeah, so I spoke to Lee Anderson just a couple of days ago. He's absolutely not backing down over this. He is saying that he has the support of every right-thinking person in the country, and to be honest with you, I think he does. But the latest on all of this now is that Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, has come out swinging and actually saying, look, we do have people who live in Britain but are not of Britain. We have allowed people in who are essentially a Trojan horse, who hate Britain and hate, she extended that, Western civilization in general. A lot of people can simply see that with their own eyes. That is the reality when people see these hate marches that take place at the weekend and whenever certain international events erupt and rear their head. It's a devastating situation for our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak because he has lost his voter base, really, when it comes to these things. People think it's about time that people stood up to radical fundamentalist Islam. And that Islamophobia, whilst it exists and obviously is awful and should be stamped out, is now really being used to change the narrative yet again away from the fact that our MPs and members of the public do face serious threats from radical Islamists. That is the major threat to public safety in this country, and it is not going away. And yet again, looking for an excuse to do anything but address that real problem by crying racism, etc. So that's kind of where we are. And £31 million now is going to have to be taken out of the taxpayer's pocket to give our MPs things like bodyguards. Our MPs want to work from home now because of these threats, but still, they will not address the root cause of this problem, which is radical fundamentalist extremism.
And he's very brave to speak out about it.
Yeah, no, indeed, and it's cost him the whip. It's cost him his job essentially. It is brave. What the Conservative Party expected that he would do, which is what every other politician has ever done, which is say what they really mean, face the backlash, then apologise and say I didn't really mean it. And he's not done that. He's sticking to his guns. I say good on him.
He has indeed, Patrick, thanks for your time. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, my friend. Thank you very much. Now, coming up, of course, straight after me, that's it for me. Shari's up next.